Okay. Okay, thank you very much, Sasha, for the nice introduction. As you mentioned, my name is Fazlullah Akhtar. Today, I would like to tell you something about the climate change impacts on stream flow in Alingar watershed in Afghanistan. The contents which I will be covering today, I will give you a brief introduction of the area, the motivation behind the study, then the objective of the study, the materials and methods that I used in carrying out this analysis, and then, yeah, a bit of discussion and results and conclusion. First of all, I would like to tell you that the population growth in Afghanistan has been also experienced in the last couple of years. In this specific area where I carried out the study, the population density is already 50 per square kilometer, although the current census are still not updated. Yeah, but the overall trend which has been projected is increasing throughout the country, and especially also in the Alingar watershed. Another key issue in Afghanistan in the irrigation system, that's inefficiency and the losses that take place at the farm level, at the canal level, and generally at the system level. Normally at the conveyance system, we have more than 40% of losses. At the farm level, we have in the range of around 60% losses. So lots of water are being wasted in the irrigation system in Afghanistan. There is not adequate infrastructure for irrigation system. Around 12% of the country is arable, but then a minor percentage of this is under irrigation, which means there is over dependency on foreign exports for cereals, especially flour, and many other food products. So irrigation inadequacy, irrigation infrastructure inadequacy is one of the key issues that contribute to this problem. Then on the other side, we have technical and institutional shortcomings. The current institutional setup in Afghanistan that's involved with engineering and water infrastructure is not capable of addressing the key issues that we are facing at the country level in general. Besides this, the technological intervention in the irrigation sector is also not enough and is not answering the actual needs at the country level. Yeah, in the specific watershed, around 1,000 square kilometers is snow covered already, which is projected to be changing over the passage of time, while we have the anticipated effects of climate change. So entirely the rivers are snow melt, and the fear that hovers around that if we reduce the snow cover, if we lose the snow cover, we will have no water or less water in the rivers and canals, and that's why the dependency on foreign imports will increase. Agriculture sector will be badly affected. Okay, to address these changes and maybe come up with sustainable planning initiatives, we need data always, the ground data from the field we needed, which is also missing. There has been considerable loss from 1979 when the Soviet invasion took place over Afghanistan till 2001 when Taliban were in rule. So data has been the key issue, which is usually key for planning and management interventions, and that has been unfortunately missing. In the last 20 years, we did progress at some level to install stations and gather data, and somehow so far it's working to some level. But again, we don't know what's going to happen maybe in the next couple of years under the current regime, and that has been constantly the issue in the irrigation sector. And then we lack tools in order to use at the country level, at the institution level, at the policy level, to address the issue of the data scarcity and to make it a substantial part of the planning and management interventions. So that's why, based on this reason, it was important to look at the stream flow, water availability under the climate change conditions. The current study has been carried out in Alingar watershed, which is part of the Kabul River Basin here, as you see. It's one of the most populated river basins. Around 1/3 population of the country is living in this Kabul River Basin. And Alingar watershed is one of them, as I said. Around 1,000 square kilometer area is snow covered. So we consider this area, it's extremely heterogeneous. You see the elevation difference between downstream is around 601 meter above sea level, and then up to almost 6,000 meter above sea level. So that's the elevation difference. Similar is the cropping heterogeneity, or the cropping pattern heterogeneity. Soil conditions, for example, it is too much different between the upstream and downstream. At the downstream level, we grow 2 to 3 crops per year. Normally, wheat is always compulsory, and then followed by vegetables mostly. And then in the upstream region, it's the high elevation zone, so there's only 1 crop per year grown. You see from this graph here, the water bodies cover only 1%. Irrigated area is only 3% of the whole basin, which is 6,000 square kilometer area of the entire watershed. Forest covers around 32%. There might be a question later that we could address, that what you could do with 3% irrigated area. And yeah, we could go forward to debate about this. The barren land is said to be 2%. You can clearly see the precipitation. It's around 600 millimeter coming from the global data sets. The potential evapotranspiration, or the reference evapotranspiration, is around 1,300 millimeter. So you can clearly see the water scarcity that do exist in this. So the potential demand is this much, and the actual precipitation that's being received at this watershed is around 600 millimeter. So all what's missing is the deficit, actually, that we have to look for. The irrigation sources in this very watershed is canal, quarries, canals, which are the underground channels, springs and wells. Similarly, the irrigation system is supply-based. That means whatever the amount is available, that's being distributed among farmers. So it's not really the crop water demand that's being fulfilled, but rather the amount of water which is available is being distributed among the farmers. The main crops that are grown across the watershed is the wheat, barley, vegetables of different types. It's not only grown for this very basin because the population density is rather low compared to the rest of the basin, but especially in winter when the upstream heights are frozen and around 6 million Afghans are living in the capital. Nothing grows there almost, and then the supply of these vegetables go from this area, the Alingar watershed mainly. And that's so much important. Based on these points, we are going to analyze the impacts of climate change on the water availability in the Alingar watershed. The photos which you see are the flow within that watershed. For this purpose, we used the methodological framework which we used SWAT model. The main data was the digital elevation model. We received it from the Alaska Satellite Facility of 12.5 meter. Maybe I could give more details if somebody was interested. The land cover map was used from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. The soil map was also retrieved from the FAO UNESCO portal. The weather data was collected from the climate forecast system analysis. We used SWAT model to simulate the stream flow. And then, further then for calibration purpose of the model to see whether how much the simulated results are close to the actual measured stream flow at the station. So we use SWAT cup model then. Once the model was calibrated and validated, we considered the RCP 4.5 and 8.5 scenarios, and the future period was considered from 2020 till 2045 in order to see the future projections. The performance metrics is always important, that how the model behaves towards the against the actual data. So we use the Kling-Gupta efficiency, the Nash-Sutcliffe efficiency, and the coefficient of determinations. These were the key tools which we used for the assessment of the performance of the model. I will give the details later. Now I come to the results. One of the basic criteria in modeling, many of you you know, in order to find out which parameters are sensitive. So in this case, we are looking at the soil parameters, the management relevant parameters, for example, at the basin level. Since it's a snow melt fed watershed, for us, it was important to look at more maybe the snow melt or the snow relevant parameters. So in this case, as you see here in this graph, the top three most sensitive parameters were both the snow relevant and runoff relevant, the curve number and the snow melt at the maximum snow melt and minimum snow melt relevant parameters. And then overall, these 8 parameters were sensitive. So they are being in terms of their sensitivity, and they were placed here to see which parameter was most sensitive. So this is the actual ranking. So the most sensitive was this snow relevant. This was also snow relevant parameter, runoff relevant parameter, and then comes down to the basin-wide and hydrological response unit level parameters. Okay. As I mentioned earlier, the calibration period for which the data was available, we considered 2008 to 2013. And for validation period, we used 2014 till 2019, this period. It was interesting, as you see here from the graph, this is a product of the SWAT cup model once we used it for calibration. During the calibration, these 3 matrices, R square, NSE, Nash-Sutcliffe efficiency, and the Kling-Gupta efficiency. During the calibration, this was our key objective, actually. These were the side metrics which we used. The Kling-Gupta efficiency was 72%, which normally above 50 is acceptable based on the literature. The mean simulated stream flow and mean observed stream flow, look at the closeness. 54 millimeter was the simulated, and 51 millimeter was the observed one, which is extremely close to each other. So the R square value was 0.6. The P factor here in this case, for example, you see 0.86. It's actually the number of observed data sets which were bracketed during the calibration process. So 86% of the actual data was hit by the simulations that we carried out under this model. This very optimistic, actually. The R factor is actually the thickness of this 95 ppm here. So normally the more thinner it is, the more accurate or close to the observed data it is. And then the sensitive parameters, which we just discussed, when we adjusted these parameters and rerun the model for this period, yeah, look, the P factor came to 92% of the observed data sets were touched by the simulations, which is really one of the fancy results, with 98% of the R square value. In the Kling-Gupta efficiency increased from 72% to 89%. The same NSE raised from 59 to close to 100%, which is one of the, I think, the best simulations under this such a heterogeneous watersheds. Okay. The next thing is then we wanted to look at till 2045. What would be the annual changes that we shall expect during this time, the future scenario? So the base period, we saw that compared to the base period under the RCP 4.5 scenario, around 48% increase was observed. For what? For annual minimum stream flow. So the annual minimum stream flow increased by 48% under this scenario and around 125% by under the RCP 8.5. But this result is slightly reversed in the annual maximum stream flow. So the maximum that has been observed during the base period, it will be reduced by 17% and almost 42% during this period. But then overall at the mean stream flow at the annual level, so then the changes are not different. So this increase in this decrease here, when they are averaged around 15%, 15.2 and 15.6% annual reduction in the mean annual flow will be observed. So then it's we don't stop it here, and then we further look into the months to see the behavior throughout this period during the base period. This is the base period which you see. Look, the peak flow normally currently what's going on. Normally, when the snow melts, the snowfall starts in November, December, January, and February. So till normally, sometimes also maybe in March, but usually we can say that the snowfall happens till the end of February. And then the melt starts, and then most of the snow melts. Then the peak hydrograph or the peak discharge at the river happens somewhere in end of May or June here. But what we saw under these two scenarios was also very much interesting is that we got two peaks instead of one annual peak usually observed in June. We expect that in the future till 2045, this peak might be divided by two. So the one hydrograph peak could be experienced in April. That means what? That due to the increased temperature or earlier earlier melt of the temperature, the snow cover, maybe the melt starts earlier. So this is maybe where we can expect floods here sometime in March, which was also those who are aware of the North Rhine-Westphalia case, for example, we observed it most recently, maybe in this period. And the second peak which develops is in the months of August. And that means the monsoon rains, which is partially being received at this watershed also, the monsoon rains will increase the peak hydrograph here also in the month of August, but this has not been usually the case. So the one peak was split into two, and that's one of the potential ill impacts during the future projection of the stream flow at the Alingar watershed. Then if you further look at this graph in terms of percentage change, again, this thing has been explained once again here, that normally the vegetables and the crops that are dependent on irrigation, the irrigation starts in the month of March, April, and May usually. And then some vegetables could be irrigated in June and July also. So this is the peak demand period for the crops. But what happens actually is during the peak demand period, the maximum reduction happens, up to 80% reduction happens in the peak demand period. So this is really alarming for food security reasons, because if we don't have enough water during the peak demand period, what's going to happen? The farmer is always the first one who is the loser. And ultimately, the common population will be affected. The price could hit high, and dependency on foreign exports, imports will also be manifolded. So our results suggest that this is one of the scary points maybe in the future, that during the peak demand period, we won't be able to get enough food for the local population. And that's where the policymakers and researchers have to step in and maybe come up to some mitigating points to reduce this risk and avoid the food insecurity that might hit the population badly. The conclusions of my presentation, that one of using sophisticated hydrological models together with global data sets, that could pave the way for reasonable solutions in order to capture the potential impacts of anticipated climate change on stream flow. in data scarce environments, because as I said earlier in my introduction, that one of the key issues that we are facing is the data unavailability. That's always key for master planning and sustainable interventions. But in case of data scarce, what we could do is always, shall not just sit silent, but maybe make use of such models with global data sets and draw scenarios that could be helpful for planning and management. We also see that where there's high heterogeneity, spatial heterogeneity in watersheds, like as I presented, for streamflow assessment, the Kling-Gupta efficiency together with the coefficient of determination, P and R factors, that enhances the model performance actually. So it's kind of suggestions for the colleagues who might follow the same path, that these things could be helpful in their modeling accuracy. Yeah, as I said earlier, the peak hydrograph slate in March and April. In August shows earlier snowmelt and increase in summer monsoon rain, respectively. So that's kind of where the requires the policy interventions in order to address these issues, and perhaps go for some adaptation strategies. And what are those adaptation strategies? Maybe when we have these conditions, for example, we are not mentally ready, that we expect maybe a flood in March and then another flood in August. What it requires maybe that we should rearrange the irrigation schedules, or in generally the cropping patterns, because maybe we need to crop those species, let's say, who demands lower water availability. Let's say when we had the peak in June before, but now we don't have that peak or that peak availability. So really we have to change the cropping pattern then. Similarly, in order to maybe store the surplus water that we receive during these two periods, we need storages, dams or reservoirs in order to store this water and maybe pump it out during the peak demand period. So this one of the steps that could be taken in order to tackle the climate change issue, and also maybe to counterbalance the disadvantageous impacts of climate change and maybe land use change, because we are moving generally towards urbanization. We are forgetting the agriculture sector. Meanwhile, the climate change is hitting us hard. So this could be used in order to build up storages and use it for already the food insecure populations. Most interestingly, as a final one, SWAT model with similar studies could be used as a discussion tool when we speak about water allocation between different sectors. If I tell you about Afghanistan, we had recently been starting with in the last couple of years, some industrial setups which require a lot of water, and always more than 97% of the irrigation used in Afghanistan is purely in agriculture, but still the inefficiency in the system causes us to depend on imports. And if the industrial sector demand is increasing, certainly there will be a cutoff from the agricultural water. So if we don't work on the efficiency in the water allocation quotas, then the problem could be maximized. So such models could be helpful in water allocation and addressing the water management issues. Thank you very much. This was the end of my words.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you very much, Fazl. That was a very interesting presentation. I also learned a lot, and I believe we have many interesting questions coming up towards you, and I would like the audience to either use the raise hand function, and also the other possibility is to write the question in the chat. I have the feeling that Christian was first, then I am happy to take Alicia and Ghazali. So Christian, please.
Thank you very much, Fazlullah. Very nice presentation, very informative. If I if I move already to your conclusions, in reality, what you are asking for, or what you think is necessary, is a lot of policy work and policy decisions. Now, how do you, I don't want to sound too pessimistic, but how do you see the next couple of years against the backdrop of the current political developments in Afghanistan, and also comparing, maybe comparing how policy decisions were taken during the previous Taliban regime? How do you foresee these particular questions that in reality need urgent reactions from the policy side? How do you see the new government dealing with this? What would be your best guesswork in terms of policy interventions from the new regime in Kabul? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Burgermeister, for the nice question. I think this is one of the vital issues that everybody is generally worried about. Okay, one of the key problems that people do have with the Taliban regime is their disbelief in science, for example, their dissociation from the modern science and technology. Yeah, but somehow if the international pressure is continued the way it goes on somehow, I think to some level they must agree. If they have to accept, if they need donation, if they need assistance, and maybe in development sector, at some step they have to come up and accept the reality that this is actually happening, because now they are in the control of the whole country. So they are responsible theoretically for the food supply, for the food security of this nation, let's say. So they cannot really bypass this fact that they have to respond to the people's demands, be it in the banking sector, be it in the agriculture sector, because already there are horrible reports coming from the World Health Organization and World Food Program, and also the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, that food insecurity is hitting the major part of the poor population across the country. So they have to listen. It personally, I won't expect anything soon from them, but yeah, we need to continuously, I think, develop such alarming reports and scientific factual sheets in order to yeah, keep them aware of this. These are the things that they have to think of sometime, if they have to rule the country and meet the demands of the nation. Again, the major exports of the country are dry fruits, for example, melons, which are mostly coming from the irrigated part of the country. And if we lose the snow cover, it's a total disaster. They have to listen to it, and they have to listen to the technicians. They cannot, I think, bypass them. So I won't have an emergency. I'm not so much wishful currently, having their I don't know if I can say their ignorant outlook at this level, but hopefully when the voice gets louder, I'm sure to some level they have to come forward and address these challenges which the country is facing. I hope I have answered the question.
Thank you very much. Yes, you did. Thank you, Fazlullah.
Thank you. Now, Alicia, please.
Thank you very much, Fazlullah, for your very interesting presentation. I have I would like to suggest 3 ideas for your consideration. First one is climate change projections for Central Asia often show that the precipitation in winter will increasingly fall in the form of rain rather than snow. So that would have a big impact in the seasonality of the stream flow if it falls as rain or snow. So I was wondering if you already had that in your model, or if you could integrate this change in the precipitation patterns as a rain rather than snow, and then impacts on seasonality. This links to my second aspect. You also already mentioned dams. So it would be, I think, very useful if you can do some scenarios of actions. What can be done? For example, on the supply side, probably easier option would be construct these reservoirs, I'm imagining, and perhaps even better if you combine it with hydro energy generation, electricity generation. So that kind of scenario, or another scenario about irrigation expansion. So now 3% of the area is under irrigation, but definitely that's probably going to expand going forward. So if you can include that into the scenario, including changes cropping patterns and crop-specific water demands, which will be also shifting. And third idea, now you are looking only at the biophysical parts through RCPs. Perhaps it would be very useful to integrate these shared socioeconomic pathways, link them to SSPs as well, particularly regarding population growth and income growth, because that would affect water demand, not only for crops, but also for other aspects. So then you will have a sort of full picture of both how supply is changing and how demand would be changing, and then what is the imbalance between them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alisher. The first point about the conversion of snow into rain, that's true. That has been addressed in the model. It automatically converts it based on these lapse rates and so on. It's the automatic conversion, and that's why the split of two peaks was a result of this. That the partially the winter snow is converted into rain also in the future scenarios. So that's uniform over the Hindukush Himalaya region onward, going towards the Central Asia. Regarding the suggestion of considering the crop-specific water demand, that's a good suggestion, and I think in our future work we are going to address this, looking at more from the demand-based side now. So right now what we did was more or less simulated the availability, what comes on or what's in the plate right now, and then we are going to comparatively analyze it against the demand side of the water. Yeah, and then population growth again. It's nice. One of the key issues that we have with the population census in Afghanistan, it's not accurate. It's always just projections and projections. But still, yeah, you're right. That it's better to maybe consider it based on scenario basis, and then in either category, if it falls, so we would know what could be the possible outcome. They're really good suggestions, and thank you very much. We will consider it. The in our another paper, which is more covering the entire basin, actually, it's in the process of publication. So maybe in the next presentation sometime, we would have some further interesting debate about this.
Thank you. I believe next was Ghazali. He will probably share some insights from his expertise on climate smart agriculture and how this will go into your research, Fazlullah. Ghazali.
Can you repeat it? Sorry.
Next is Ghazali. He has expertise on climate smart agriculture, and I guess he will share it with you now, which opportunities or possibilities are there.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Ghazali?
Yeah, hello, Dr. Stark. Hello?
Yes, Ghazali?
Yeah,
Please.
yeah, I think Alicia has covered.
Ghazali, you are muted.
Okay.
Sorry.
I'm saying Alicia has covered part of my issues, but I still want to add that the input into the RCPs used in running these models, a lot of them come from the social economic pathways, and I think in the next simulations, if they could capture the nationally determined contributions or the NDCs, at the Paris Agreement, these will have effect on the outcomes of some of the simulations. That is what I just want to add. Sorry for the Jackie from my side.
Thank you, Ghazali. Yes, it's a good suggestion. For the time being, the RCP scenarios were derived from the Codex domain, which is hosted by the Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology. So that has been the key source of our data. And you know, there are lots of, there's a huge background behind these RCP scenarios have been developed. So we mainly took out the temperature and precipitation in our case, which is the key drivers for stream flow, snow cover variations, irrigation demand and supply, and so on. Yeah, and the national determinants, the nationally determined factors, so far we didn't have, unfortunately, such data sets to be considered. But it's a nice suggestion. Would be nice also, hopefully in the future, if we could make use of those parameters too.
Thank you. Next in line would be Imran, then followed by Alma and Deepesh. Please go on.
Yeah. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much, Dr. Fazl, for your nice presentation. And already there are limited work for Afghanistan there, and yeah, especially you have done climate change scenario. It's great work. And also I really like the photo. I think you are a great photographer as well. It's taken by you, I think so. And I have one question that in page 12, slide number 12, I really like the hydrograph that you made, that the peak is splitting into two peaks. So I want to just get your ideas that I imagine that Alingar is also a glacier-based basin, if I am not wrong, because of the elevations, I just guess. And if it is so, and I didn't work with SWAT. I don't know how much SWAT can consider the contribution of glacier in this sub-basin. And if it does consider or not, and then how the climate change will consider the contribution of glacier, that whether it will shift the peak backward or it will shift the peak forward in forward months. So I just want to get your ideas. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Imran. Yes, you're right there. SWAT actually operates in this temperature lapse rate way. So each elevation band, let's say 1 kilometer elevation, there is a change of, they consider the change in temperature. So the 6,000 meter above sea level elevation, so each gradient has been considered actually. That's why we developed these hydrological response unit to see these different left rate and eventual flow. So each temperature change there, it drives the melt actually, whether it's glacier or whether it's snowfall. So the temperature increment actually drives the melt rate. And that's how, whether it's a glacier, whether it's a standard snow cover, for example, so it melts down whatever exists there. So SWAT considers this one. And then the two peak development, which you just referred to, as I said also partially earlier, as a standard case, normally it seems the glacier part has been very much considered, because the current scenario says here, okay, let me, here, that June, for example, this steady melt caused the peak flow happen somewhere in June here. But then the earlier smaller peak, which means when the temperature rises, so part of the snow that exists in the middle elevation zone especially, that has been melted, and that's why this peak was developed. And then the next peak, which comes here in the month of August. So my assumption was this mostly maybe the increase in monsoon rains and rains, because if you the entire Hindukush Himalaya region, if you see normally from June onwards or July somewhere, the monsoon rain starts till end of September or start of October. So my assumption was that actually it's the monsoon rains that maximizes compared to the past, so it maximizes, and that's what we also saw in the literature about the Hindukush Himalaya region, whether it covers Pakistan or India, for example. So this pattern has been the same. So this, of course, is the melt which comes from the glacier and snow cover, and this is the contribution of monsoon rains which maximize this peak under RCP 4.5 and 8.5.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yes, Alma, please.
Yeah, thanks, Fazl, for your great presentation. I would like to go back to the policy issues raised in the beginning of the question round. I read some report recently about whole farmlands and farms taken away by non-Pashto, taken away from non-Pashto communities, especially Hazara communities, I think more in the north of Afghanistan, not so much in the area you've been talking about. I wanted to ask if you if this matches your own sources of information, and if it's true, if it happens in also in other areas of Afghanistan, as far as you know, and what kind of implications that would have for food security and for agricultural, issues in Afghanistan.
Thank you very much, Salma. A good question. I also saw some of such shots in the media channels. I think association of the current, I don't know, violence or maybe injustice to racial or ethnical, I think, I don't personally believe in it. For example, let's say I'm Pashtun from the region, and Kunduz, we couldn't access our fields in the last 20 years. We have a large farming area, but we cannot access it, we cannot get food from it. The same is for the Hazara there, and the same is for Tajik there. It's simply, I think, the non-state actors or the Taliban, which don't allow us or don't allow the local population to access their produce, because they have been also not only asking for their share, which is 10%, but people like us who have been part of the government, and somehow they would target them. So and that's, I think it's not really ethnical issue. It's not really, everybody is suffering equally, I would say, depending on the density of these bad guys which are currently ruling the country. Of course, it has the, for example, if we would farm our own land, let's say as a person, of course, we will do all the best to make a good produce out of it, and maybe to be able to sell and make profits out of it. But if we just leave it like this, we don't know if somebody would spend that much effort and energy to grow it and get more yield. So certainly, I don't grow my own land, so I don't get anything out of it. And maybe somebody is using only for grazing. So this certainly dangerous maybe in the long run for the food security, because these were actually the areas which were, let's say Kunduz was considered to be the food basket of Afghanistan. It was supplying rice, melons, sweet melons, for example, exporting also abroad out of the country. But now somehow it doesn't produce enough to feed the even local population. And that means the actual owners of the agricultural lands, be it Pashtun, Hazara, Tajik, or anyone, they are away from their lands. They cannot graze their animals, or they cannot have their own farming units to cultivate by themselves. And that's why maybe the others don't care. So certainly has disadvantageous impacts for the poor population and generally the food security. And one thing more, in the last couple of years, we had tremendously increased our exports to, let's say, pine nuts. We were tons of pine nuts worth millions of dollars we were exporting to China. The melons, they happen to appear in London, for example. Some dry fruits you can still buy in German supermarkets. This is certainly going to affect, I think, because if people don't access their farms, they won't be able to produce. They won't have economic security, they won't have physical security, then the supply line will be affected. And of course, the farmer is always the first one who will be affected. If they, right now, the purchasing power of the people is so low that they cannot buy many things under the current conditions because of the destroyed banking system, market unavailability, no connection to foreign world. Yeah, so this is certainly going to affect almost, I think, everyone. Yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Next is Deepesh.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Fazlullah, for the nice presentation. Your results shows that there will be less water, I mean, decreasing discharge, but also the change in precipitation pattern within the year. So do you see some positive aspects, opportunity in especially in the agriculture disaster sector, because the water availability is decreasing in a historical peak season, but it's increasing in the historical dry period. So won't there be more usable water throughout the year and less precipitation extremes, less disaster? What's your opinion on this? Because of this you can see in the change in distribution precipitation pattern in the year, and then more water available throughout the year.
Okay, thank you very much, Deepesh, for the nice question. I was expecting it actually. Yeah, I think with the change of precipitation, okay, there are opportunities also, I think, in some cases. For example, let's say here is somewhere where my cursor is, there is Kabul. This is a monocrop region normally. So with the changing climate, this monocrop region, we expect this to be converted into double crops, for example. Having typically agricultural idea of more heat units, more degree days, and I think we could grow maybe more here. But it has devastating effects here. In case of this, for example, Kabul, the capital, is hosting around 6 million population. Sorry, yeah, only the city is hosting 6 million population, but the entire basin is hosting the whole country's 1/3 population. Actually, what happens is actually when the snow cover reduces here in the peaks here, for example, especially in winter, the food supply comes from this region, which is based on the snow melt, actually. So when this snow melt is affected, so certainly, okay, in Kabul, in the upstream regions, there will be double crops. We could grow maybe a bit more than the normal, which we had historically before. But here at the downstream regions, the water availability would be a challenge during the peak demand period. So the amount of food which they could produce here at the downstream, that will be affected. So it will have consequences for the upstream people. So the upstream might get benefit as a let's say if I would be a selfish farmer, I would be happy partially, for example, because I could get more growing degree days here and can grow more. But generally at the national level, for example, the downstream are the sufferers. They might not be able to produce more, and they might not be able also to supply it to the upstream regions. But they could also get higher prices for the same thing. So it's both way. I think it's interlinked. The disaster is on the other side, the benefits on the other side, then and vice versa. But one of maybe the prospects is that that they introduce low water demanding crops, or maybe more drought resilient crops. For example, let's say what the tomato we have heard about that they are growing in Israel, for example. Let's say something like this could be alternatives in this region when there is water deficiency or water stress conditions in this country.
Thank you. I don't see any more raised hands except for the one that Deepesh had, which now went down. Any more questions from the audience? I see that this is not the case, then I would like to say thanks to you, Fazl, once again for this very interesting presentation, and thanks to the audience for the very interesting questions and the lively discussion. Then that's it for today. Next week, we don't have a colloquium. So in 14 days, we will meet again here with Bernhard Dallheimer from University of Göttingen. Until then, have a nice time. See you the week after the next one. Bye.
Thank you very much, everybody.